Right, today I've come to the New Forest, which, like everything in England that's described as new, is about 1,000 years old. And I've come to see a very unusual war memorial. And this is the Portuguese Fireplace, sometimes known also as the Canadian Fireplace. And it is probably one of the most unusual war memorials in Britain. This fireplace is all that's left of a camp that once encompassed almost 500 men all across this area, doing vital work in the First World War to supply Britain with timber for its military. Initially, it was believed that all the timber Britain could need could come from Canada, which has extensive forests and a well-developed logging industry. Unfortunately, all the freight was needed for munitions and fuel and food and other aspects of warfare, and there was none left for timber. With so little available freight for Canadian timber, the Canadians sent over their own loggers to work English forests for the war effort. At its height, this camp contained 400 Canadians who worked the forests around here. They were joined, after 1916, by several hundred Portuguese who joined the war effort after the Germans threatened their colonies in Africa. For their logging camp, the Canadians brought over their own equipment and altered it to suit the English forests and the English climate. They even built a light railway, including a locomotive. Many accommodations were made for the Portuguese and Canadians, including issuing special ration books for the Portuguese so that they could maintain their national traditional diet while staying in England. This fireplace is a monument to all of those who served in that camp, and it is the last part of the camp that remains. The rest was torn down and returned to forest. When one imagines a forest, one tends to imagine trees, but that isn't actually the case. In England, a forest is traditionally wherever forest law applied. William the Conqueror took this whole area, hundreds and hundreds of acres, as his royal forest for the creation of a deer park where he could hunt and fish and just enjoy himself in the countryside, without necessarily meaning that it had to be full of trees. Now, William the Conqueror wanted a new forest predominantly for hunting. He wanted deer, he wanted boar, he wanted to kill things in the forest. Which is, to be fair, what it was used for a long time. And in fact, a number of people who should probably have been king died hunting in this forest in somewhat suspicious circumstances. So this is the Rufus stone, claimed to be the place where William II, known as the Rufus, died. And it's got a little plaque. Here stood the oak tree on which an arrow shot by Sir Walter Tyrrell at a stag glanced and struck King William II, surnamed Rufus, on the breast, of which he instantly died on the 2nd day of August, anno 1100, or 1100. And this, as you can see, is not a stone, it is made of metal. The stone is inside, which is necessary because the stone kept getting vandalised. It's very well protected now. Despite this being the place that everyone says that William II died and there's a stone to mark the spot, it probably isn't. So Charles II knew that it happened nearby here. Everyone knew it happened nearby here. But Charles II found a tree that he thought looked big enough for an arrow to glance off of, and said it was probably this tree. And because Charles II was king, and has a famous association with oak trees due to hiding in an oak tree, supposedly, everyone believed him. As a forest, it also served the commoners who had land tied to the forest, which gave them the rights to graze their animals, to cut for clay, cut for peat, to gather the various things that the forest naturally gave, firewood, acorns, that sort of thing. And even today, commoners have 4,000 wild ponies that graze in the forest all the time. We use the word wild, but really more accurately they're feral, and even then, they're pretty tame. They're quite tame. And while it doesn't mean that there have to be trees, there are, as you can see, a lot of trees, because that's the environment that traditionally gave the best hunting. Now, when the Royal Navy started to become incredibly important for the national defence, you can imagine that all of those trees suddenly seemed like a really good resource that we desperately wanted to cut down, trampling on the rights of the commoners who had, for hundreds of years, been allowed to use this land. Eventually a compromise was reached where 10% was used for forestry, cutting down timber, and the rest remained in common for the commoners of the New Forest. The New Forest is still Crown property today, 90% of it in fact, and it is managed by the Forestry Commission, which is an arm of the government. They're the ones that maintain it for the good of the nation. It was also declared a national park in 2005, I think it was. If not, I'll pop a correction on the bottom. The need for timber in World War I and the expected need in the future meant a number of oak forests were chopped down and replaced with fast-growing conifer forests. This is a process that the Forestry Commission is slowly reversing because conifer forests change the nature of the soil beneath them, leaching it of resources. So it makes it very difficult, if you don't correct it as early as possible, to plant new native forest in its place. And some of the trees here are fantastic. Beautiful oaks, birches, and other trees I don't know the name of because I'm not very good at botany.